Hey everyone, welcome to episode 2 of To the Point. We're going to talk about source of income discrimination today, and for me, this is one of those litmus test issues that really speaks to the soul of a city. And with the new city council now in place, there might be a willingness to finally ban source of income discrimination in Dallas. And this video is a little bit longer than usual, but I really feel like if folks understood what was going on, it would rattle their consciousness and compel them to act both at the local and state level. But first, many folks aren't familiar with this issue of source of income discrimination, so let me spend a little bit of time explaining it. So housing choice vouchers, they're sometimes called Section 8 vouchers. They were initiated by Congress in 1974. And the way that it works is that low-income families below a certain income threshold can apply for a voucher. And it takes many years on a waiting list. And if you're lucky, you get a voucher and you can look for an apartment in any part of the metro area. You can use a voucher anywhere, so long as it covers the rent that's being asked by the landlord. A federal housing voucher basically covers the difference between what you can afford and the asked rent. And so tenants will pay 30% of their income toward the rent, whatever that might be, and the voucher then covers the rest of it. So vouchers are supposed to be the golden ticket to opportunity. They were designed to help low-income families move out of areas of concentrated poverty into higher opportunity areas with better amenities, access, good schools, etc. And it's all by choice. Nobody is forced to apply or move anywhere. In Dallas, the voucher amount is based on the zip code you want to move into. So in Uptown, the voucher covers rents up to about $1,400 per month. In downtown, it's closer to $1,100. In higher poverty areas, it may be closer to $700 or $800 per month. So contrary to popular belief, vouchers can actually be pretty lucrative and can often cover rents no matter where you're looking. So now that you know what a federal housing voucher is and how it works, you might be wondering, does this voucher stuff actually work to improve lives? And there's recent groundbreaking research from renowned economist Chetty, which suggests that vouchers can fundamentally change the life trajectory of low-income kids. So Chetty looked at housing vouchers that were randomly assigned to low-income families nationally. The majority of recipients in his study were single mothers of color, half had never been married, only a third completed high school. And he compared kids who moved to a better neighborhood, those were the voucher winners, with kids who stayed in areas of concentrated poverty, those didn't win a voucher. And he tracked these kids into adulthood to find out what happened to them. And because the vouchers were assigned randomly, it created a perfect scientific experiment where you could compare the outcomes, right? Some won the voucher and moved to a better area. Some didn't win the voucher and stayed in areas of high poverty. The question is, did it make a difference in their life outcomes? And Chetty found that if you were a low-income kid and your family used a voucher to move to a higher opportunity neighborhood before age 13, you were more likely to attend college, more likely to get married and have children with a father present. You had 31% more in annual income. Expected lifetime earnings increased by approximately $302,000. You were more likely to live in better, lower poverty neighborhoods as an adult. You paid more to Uncle Sam in terms of federal income tax. You required less government assistance later on in life. And there was a huge generational impact that's very likely, right? Is that kids and grandkids are more likely to be raised in better neighborhoods by two parents who are more likely to be educated and have higher incomes. And this breaks the cycle of generational poverty. So the scale and the scope of these outcomes are very dramatic. I would argue that it's one of the most significant pieces of research on economic mobility, on climbing up the income ladder. And it taught us what I think is a very important lesson that should shape our public policy. So back to the specific source of income discrimination issue. Here's the main problem. Landlords, particularly those in high opportunity areas, consistently refuse voucher holders, even when the voucher covers the rent that's being asked. And it's perfectly legal for them to do so. Source of income discrimination is perfectly legal today. And here's how it plays out. So families on the lower ends of the poverty spectrum with a voucher, our most vulnerable citizens, many of them are disabled, they go to a landlord and they say, I'd like to live here. It'd be a better life for me and my kids. I can afford the rent that's being asked. You have units available. I meet all the other requirements of tenancy. Vouchers, of course, are a stable, lawful source of income. And the landlord legally says no, just because you're a voucher holder. These aren't isolated anecdotes. This is a practice in high opportunity areas. There are about 1,000 families today in Dallas that have a voucher, but they can't find a landlord to take them. And some estimates say that about 60% of all the vouchers in Dallas are unusable because of this problem. And then after 90 days, you have to turn back in the voucher if you haven't found a landlord yet. So after years on the wait list, you have 90 days to find a landlord. If they don't take it, you got to give the voucher back. And there are plenty of stories of that happening. So here's also where race comes in. More than 9 out of 10 voucher holders are people of color, predominantly African American. So voucher discrimination has a disproportionate impact, pretty much an exclusive impact on low-income people of color. And while the practice may appear race-neutral to some, regardless of intent, it manifests as a form of racial discrimination. It's as plain as day. And so when asked why they won't take vouchers, some landlords say that the Section 8 paperwork is too burdensome. But Dallas's Inclusive Communities Project has found that landlords who own lots of units across the city will accept vouchers in disadvantaged areas, but they'll refuse vouchers in wealthier neighborhoods, which kind of refutes the paperwork argument, right? And some fair housing advocates say that what landlords are really worried about is that voucher tenants might deter other market rate renters. So source of income discrimination is something that keeps segregation cemented in place. So if you look at this map, and it was built by Robert Munninger at Commit, red areas have lots of voucher holders, green areas have virtually zero voucher holders. And we know that generally the green areas are the highest opportunity areas. So source of income discrimination is a barrier that keeps poor people out of wealthy neighborhoods. And it's a perfectly legal barrier. As a city and a state, we've basically said that voucher holders belong in high poverty areas, which goes against all the research. Several different states and cities like LA, DC, Chicago, Philly have passed non-discrimination ordinances, which say that, look, if your voucher covers the asked rent and you meet all the requirements of tenancy, a landlord can't say no to you just because you have a voucher. Now you notice Texas in red. That's because it is especially complicated here. So the story starts in 2014 when the city of Austin passed a non-discrimination ordinance. At that time, the Austin Tenants Council found that only 6% of apartments were accepting vouchers, and most of those were in areas of concentrated poverty. So Austin passed this ordinance, but then landlords and the apartment associations pushed back against Austin. They filed for an injunction, and they lobbied the state legislature. And so then in 2015, the Texas state legislature passed a law that banned cities from passing source of income non-discrimination. That's right, you heard me right. Texas is the only state in the union that explicitly prohibits source of income non-discrimination laws. In other words, it's the only state in the union that explicitly says you can discriminate based on vouchers, and no municipality can pass a law that prevents that discrimination. Earlier this year, the Inclusive Communities Project sued Governor Abbott, saying that the state's law is unconstitutional and that it violates the Fair Housing Act, and we'll see where that suit ends up. But here in Dallas, it gets even more complicated. So under the Obama administration, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, investigated the city of Dallas for possible non-compliance with certain fair housing laws. And so the city and HUD entered into a voluntary compliance agreement called a VCA to remedy the situation. And one provision of this VCA was that it asked Dallas City Council to consider a source of income non-discrimination ordinance. But now, such an ordinance goes against state law. So you have the federal government suggesting one thing, but then the state law forbade that very thing, which put Dallas in a really weird spot. I told you it gets complicated. So in October of 2016, to kind of fulfill the VCA, the Dallas City Council formally voted on whether to pass a non-discrimination ordinance. It was a close vote, but the council ultimately voted down the non-discrimination ordinance, meaning that source of income discrimination still stands as a matter of local policy. And there were three types of arguments on the council that day. First, some council members made the property rights argument, that landlords just shouldn't be forced to accept vouchers, that participation in Section 8 should be voluntary. Second, you had some council members say that though they were personally supportive of a non-discrimination ordinance, they didn't want to run up against state law and get tied up in the courts. And third, there were some that argued that Dallas should just take a stand against the state for moral and economic reasons, that the state's law would probably be found unconstitutional eventually, and that we should pass the ordinance anyway. In the end, the strong non-discrimination ordinance was voted down, and instead the council approved a weaker, watered-down version, which said that if developers accept city subsidies or city incentives like zoning variances, then they have to accept vouchers in at least 10% of their rental units. That's a small sliver of the market. It was better than nothing, but an overall weak version. So hopefully you now understand the entire source of income debate. And here's my view. Opportunity Dallas as an organization, we seek greater economic mobility for citizens. We want to see people climbing up the income ladder, and we must confront the fact that Dallas is a bad place to grow up poor compared to other cities. But the research is clear that vouchers to high opportunity areas can change lives for the better. It's just one solution in the overall grand scheme of things, but it's still important. So when it comes to source of income discrimination, I think we ought to take a stand. It'd be easier without the state law, no doubt about that, but I hope that the new city council considers it again soon and passes a strong anti-discrimination ordinance. The city has taken a stand against other types of discrimination like SB 4. We should take a stand against all types of discrimination, however it manifests. And this will require courage. It's about the kind of city we want to live in and whether we're actually serious about poverty reduction. Nobody ever said that poverty reduction was easy or uncontroversial. This issue is emblematic of whether we're willing to do enough to meaningfully address our past mistakes, which have contributed to a very segregated city. This issue is about whether we're willing to be good, decent neighbors to those who may not have as much as we do. And the world is a complicated place, but there's one thing that I know to be true, and it's that history always sides with those who stand up against discrimination. And I think the city of Dallas ought to do that sooner rather than later.